What happens when one of television's most respected and admired actors sits down for what is supposed to be a simple, routine interview, only to suddenly find himself facing a line of questioning that feels more like an attack than a conversation? It is a situation that no guest ever truly expects when appearing on a popular talk show. After all, interviews are usually designed to promote new projects, share stories with audiences, and create an engaging but respectful exchange between host and guest. Yet sometimes in the unpredictable world of live television, a moment arises when the tone shifts dramatically, turning what should have been a relaxed discussion into a tense and unforgettable confrontation. Imagine the scene: the studio lights are bright, the audience is buzzing with excitement, and the cameras are ready to capture every moment. The actor, a figure widely known for his decades of work in film and television, walks onto the set with calm confidence. He has done interviews countless times before. For him, sitting down with hosts, answering questions, and discussing his latest project is a familiar part of the profession. Usually, these appearances are pleasant, even enjoyable. The host welcomes the guest, the audience applauds, and the conversation flows naturally from topic to topic. But on this particular day, something feels different. At first, everything appears perfectly normal. The actor greets the hosts with a warm smile, acknowledging the audience as he takes his seat. The opening questions are friendly and expected questions about his newest film, his co-stars, and the inspiration behind the project he is there to promote. He answers thoughtfully, sharing anecdotes from the set and reflecting on the themes explored in the story. The audience listens with interest, occasionally laughing or applauding at the right moments. For a while, it seems like any other interview. Yet beneath the surface, the dynamic at the table slowly begins to change. One of the hosts, known for a bold and sometimes confrontational style, starts guiding the conversation in a slightly different direction. Instead of focusing on the film or the creative process behind it, the questions begin to drift toward more controversial topics. The shift is subtle at first, almost unnoticeable. But gradually, the tone becomes sharper. The actor senses it almost immediately. Years of experience in the public eye have taught him how interviews work and how quickly they can change. He understands that not every question will be comfortable, and he is prepared to handle difficult topics. Still, there is a difference between a challenging question and one that feels deliberately provocative. The audience begins to notice the tension as well. What had started as a relaxed discussion now carries a faint edge of discomfort. Some viewers in the studio exchange glances, unsure of how the conversation might unfold. The other hosts at the table listen carefully, perhaps wondering whether the exchange is about to become more intense. Meanwhile, the actor remains composed. He answers the questions with patience, choosing his words carefully. His responses remain calm, measured, and thoughtful. He attempts to steer the conversation back toward the film and the positive message behind it. After all, that is the reason he agreed to appear on the show in the first place. But the questioning continues as the host presses further, bringing up topics that seem less about understanding the actor's perspective and more about creating a dramatic moment for television. Each new question carries a slightly sharper tone than the last. Conversation that once felt like a friendly exchange now begins to resemble a debate. At this point, the atmosphere in the studio shifts noticeably. The audience grows quieter. The laughter and applause that had filled the room earlier begin to fade. Even the production crew behind the cameras can sense the change. Moments like these are unpredictable, and everyone understands that live television can quickly move into uncomfortable territory. For the actor, the situation becomes increasingly difficult. He has spent years building a reputation not only as a talented performer, but also as someone who approaches public discussions with dignity and respect. Being placed in a situation where he feels unfairly targeted challenges that composure. Still, he tries to remain professional, responding thoughtfully while avoiding direct confrontation. Yet there comes a moment in conversations like this when patience begins to wear thin. Perhaps it is the tone of the question, or perhaps it is the repeated attempts to steer the discussion toward controversy. Whatever the reason, the actor begins to feel that the interview is no longer about meaningful dialogue. Instead, it seems to be turning into something else, something designed more for spectacle than understanding. And that is when the mood changes completely. The calm, friendly atmosphere that defined the beginning of the interview disappears, replaced by a tension that everyone in the room can feel. The audience leans forward, sensing that they may be witnessing a moment that will soon spread across social media and news outlets, the world of television. These moments often become the ones people remember most. Not because they were planned, but because they reveal something real, something unscripted. When a respected actor finds himself under pressure from a host determined to push the conversation into controversial territory, the result can be unpredictable. Will the guest remain calm and redirect the conversation? Will the host back down and return to the original topic? Or will the situation escalate into a full confrontation that leaves both sides defending their positions? No one knows in that moment. What begins as a routine interview can suddenly transform into a dramatic exchange that captures the attention of millions of viewers. It becomes the kind of television moment that people replay, analyze, and debate long after the broadcast ends. When Bryan Cranston arrived at the studio that morning, everything about the situation suggested it would be just another pleasant television appearance. He had been invited to speak about his latest project, something he had done countless times throughout his long and celebrated career. Interviews like these were a normal part of promoting new work and opportunity to share stories, discuss the creative process, and connect with audiences who admired his performances. So when Cranston stepped through the doors of the studio for The View, he likely expected a friendly and engaging conversation. After all, the show had built a reputation for lively discussions and celebrity interviews that often mixed humor, thoughtful questions, and occasional debates. Guests were usually welcomed warmly by the hosts and the studio audience. The atmosphere was typically relaxed, sometimes playful, and designed to make both the viewers and the guest feel comfortable. That morning appeared to be no different. Cranston, fresh off another critically acclaimed performance that had once again reminded audiences why he was considered one of the most respected actors in the industry, walked onto the set with the quiet confidence that fans had come to recognize. His career had spanned decades, filled with memorable roles across television, film, and theater. For many viewers, his name was synonymous with powerful acting and compelling storytelling as he made his way onto the stage. The audience responded with enthusiastic applause. Some fans had followed his work since his earlier roles, while others knew him best from his more recent performances that had earned him widespread recognition and awards. Whatever the case, there was an undeniable sense of excitement in the room. It's not every day that an actor of Cranston's stature appears on a daytime talk show. He smiled politely and waved to the audience as he approached the famous table. Where the hosts were waiting, the set of The View had hosted countless memorable conversations over the years. Politicians, actors, musicians, and public figures had all taken their seats there, sharing their opinions and stories with millions of viewers watching at home. Most of the time, these interviews unfolded in a friendly, conversational way, but sometimes something unexpected happened. That morning, however, no one in the audience had any reason to suspect that the interview would become anything other than a typical promotional appearance. Cranston greeted the hosts warmly as he took his seat across from the panel. The studio lights illuminated the set. The cameras slowly adjusted to capture the moment, and the audience gradually settled into attentive silence. From the outside, everything appeared completely normal. The hosts smiled as they welcomed him to the show. Their opening remarks were friendly and enthusiastic, acknowledging his impressive career and congratulating him on the success of his latest performance. Cranston listened attentively, nodding politely as the introduction continued. It was the kind of respectful beginning that audiences expected when a highly regarded guest appeared on the program. Behind the scenes, the production team watched carefully from the control room. Producers monitored camera angles, audio levels, and the flow of the conversation as it began. Everything seemed to be unfolding exactly as planned. Cranston leaned back slightly in his chair, looking comfortable and relaxed. Years of experience in interviews had given him a natural ease in these situations. He knew how to answer questions thoughtfully, how to share stories that audiences would enjoy. and how to keep the conversation engaging without revealing too much about a project before its release. For the first few moments, the discussion followed a familiar pattern. The hosts asked about his recent work, praising the performance that had brought him back into the spotlight yet again. Cranston responded with humility, crediting his fellow actors, the director, and the entire production team for their contributions. He spoke warmly about the experience of bringing the story to life and the challenges that came with portraying such a complex character. The audience listened closely, clearly enjoying the insight into his creative process. It felt like the start of a thoughtful and engaging interview, at exactly what fans had hoped for. But as the conversation continued, something began to shift. At first, the change was subtle. One of the hosts leaned forward slightly, glancing at her notes before looking back at Cranston. The tone of the discussion, while still polite, began to edge toward more personal territory. This wasn't unusual in itself. Talk shows often explore deeper topics once the initial introductions are out of the way. Guests are sometimes asked about their opinions, their past experiences, or their perspectives on issues related to their work. Yet there was something about the way the question was introduced that felt slightly different. Cranston noticed it. Immediately, the easy rhythm of the conversation slowed for just a moment, and the audience seemed to sense the shift as well. The room grew a little quieter as the host prepared to steer the discussion in a new direction. Up to that point, the interview had felt like a friendly conversation. It's about a successful actor's latest project. But what unfolded next would turn the moment into something far more dramatic within minutes. The discussion that had started with smiles and applause would transform into a clash that left viewers stunned. The atmosphere in the studio would change, and the exchange would soon spread far beyond the walls of the set. Clips of the moment would circulate online, sparking debate across social media and entertainment news platforms. Fans would analyze every word, every expression, every pause in the conversation. What began as a routine interview on The View would quickly become the kind of television moment people couldn't stop talking about. But beneath the calm and polished surface of the interview, something far less comfortable was beginning to take shape. From the outside, the conversation still looked like a normal daytime talk show segment. The cameras rolled smoothly, the studio lights glowed warmly across the set, and the audience watched attentively as the discussion unfolded. Yet anyone paying close attention could sense a subtle shift in the atmosphere and almost invisible tension that seemed to be building with every passing moment. It was the kind of tension that sometimes appears in live television interviews, when a conversation slowly begins drifting away from its expected path. Across the table, Behar leaned forward slightly in her chair. Those familiar with her hosting style recognized the expression on her face immediately. She wore her characteristic half-smile, a knowing smirk that often signaled she was about to ask a question that might catch a guest off guard. For years, she had built a reputation as someone who wasn't afraid to challenge the people sitting across from her. Sometimes, that approach led to lively debates. Other times, it created moments of tension that quickly captured the attention of viewers at home that morning. It seemed like one of those moments might be approaching. Joy glanced briefly at the notes in front of her before lifting her gaze toward Bryan Cranston. Her expression suggested she had something specific on her mind, something she had been waiting for the right moment to bring up. Then she spoke. "Well," she began, her voice carrying a tone that was both casual and slightly pointed. "There's something I've been wondering about for a while, and I feel like I have to ask you." The words immediately caught the attention of the audience. Whenever a host frames a question that way, it signals that the conversation may be about to move into more personal or provocative territory. Cranston, sitting calmly across from the panel, listened with quiet focus. His posture remained relaxed, but his eyes showed the attentiveness of someone who understood that the direction of the interview might be shifting. Joy continued. "Stu, wearing that familiar smirk, you've built an incredible career, playing characters who are, well, morally complicated," she said. "Some of them are brilliant, some of them are troubled, and some of them are downright dangerous." A few members of the audience chuckled softly at the description. After all, Cranston's acting career had become famous for exactly that kind of depth. Over the years, he had portrayed characters who existed in the gray areas of morality, people whose decisions and motivations often challenged viewers. To think more deeply about right and wrong, Joy then mentioned the role that had arguably defined an entire era of television. Take Walter White, for example, she said, referring to Cranston's unforgettable character from the critically acclaimed series Breaking Bad. The audience reacted instantly, even years after the show had ended. The character of Walter White remained one of the most iconic figures in modern television. A high school chemistry teacher who slowly transformed into a powerful and morally conflicted figure in the world of crime. Walter White had captivated viewers around the world. Cranston's portrayal of the character had earned him widespread praise and multiple awards, solidifying his reputation as one of the most talented actors of his generation. Joy didn't stop there. She briefly referenced some of the other characters Cranston had portrayed throughout his career, roles that, while different from Walter White, often shared a similar complexity. Many of them were individuals facing difficult choices, navigating personal struggles, or walking the thin line between good intentions and questionable actions. Then came the question that shifted the mood in the room. Joy tilted her head slightly, studying Cranston's reaction as she spoke. "So here's what I've always wondered," she said. "Do you think you're drawn to these kinds of roles because you identify with them on some level?" The words hung in the air for a moment. It wasn't an outright accusation, but it carried a certain edge, one that suggested a deeper implication behind the question, instead of focusing purely on Cranston's craft as an actor. The question seemed to hint at something more personal. The audience sensed it immediately. A few people shifted in their seats, their earlier laughter fading into quiet curiosity. Talk show interviews often include challenging questions, but this one felt slightly different. It moved the conversation away from discussing the art of acting and toward the possibility of a personal connection between the actor. Traits of his characters. Across the table, the other hosts watched closely. Some of them appeared intrigued by the direction of the discussion, while others seemed unsure how Cranston might respond. Moments like these can change the entire tone of an interview, depending on how the guest chooses to answer. Meanwhile, Cranston remained composed. His expression didn't change dramatically, but there was a brief pause before he spoke. It was the kind of pause that suggested he was carefully considering the question, deciding not only how to respond, but also how far he wanted the conversation to go. Actors are often asked about their connection to the characters they portray. It's a common topic in interviews. Yet Joy's question seemed to go a step further, implying that the darker aspects of those characters might reflect something about Cranston himself. The studio grew unusually quiet. The easy, relaxed atmosphere that had defined the beginning of the interview had shifted into something more intense. The audience waited for Cranston's answer, curious to see whether he would treat the question as a thoughtful discussion about acting, or push back against what some might interpret as a provocative suggestion. Behind the cameras, producers watched carefully from the control room. Live television has a way of creating moments that no one can fully predict. A single question, asked at just the right or wrong moment, can transform a friendly interview into something far more dramatic. And as the seconds passed, everyone in the studio understood that the conversation was no longer just about a new project or a successful career. The implication in the room became clearer as the conversation continued, and the atmosphere shifted in a way that was difficult to ignore. What had begun as a question about acting choices now seemed to carry a deeper, more personal suggestion. Some viewers in the studio felt that the comment was edging into uncomfortable territory, almost as if the line between discussing a character and judging the person portraying that character was starting to blur. Across the table, Joy Behar leaned forward again, appearing determined to expand on her point. Her tone remained conversational, but there was a firmness in the way she spoke that suggested she wanted to push the idea further. She continued by explaining that, in her opinion, actors often gravitate toward roles that reflect something within, themselves. According to her, performers sometimes feel a natural connection to certain characters because those characters represent emotions, traits, or conflicts that resonate on a personal level. It was a theory that had been discussed many times in the entertainment world, that the most convincing performances often come from actors who understand their characters deeply, perhaps even seeing parts of themselves in them. But as Joy continued speaking, the way she framed the idea made the moment more uncomfortable. She pointed out that Bryan Cranston had become particularly well known for portraying characters who lived in morally gray or ethically questionable worlds. She mentioned that throughout his career he had taken on roles involving complicated men individuals who were intelligent, persuasive, and sometimes deeply flawed. Then she added a remark that seemed to push the conversation even further. According to Joy, Cranston appeared especially skilled at portraying men who lie, cheat, and manipulate their way through life. Characters who were capable of convincing others while hiding their true motives. People who could present one image to the world while secretly operating under very different intentions. The comment hung in the air for a moment. While it might have been intended as an observation about his acting ability, the wording carried an implication that some people in the audience clearly noticed. The suggestion that an actor's repeated portrayal of manipulative characters might reflect something about the actor himself created a noticeable shift in the room's mood. The audience, which had been relaxed earlier in the interview, grew much quieter. A few people glanced toward the other hosts, curious to see how they might react to the direction the discussion was taking. Interviews on The View were known for lively debates, but even so, there were moments when a question felt unexpectedly pointed. Across the table, the other hosts appeared to sense that the tone had changed. They exchanged quick, uneasy glances, with one another's subtle reactions that were easy to miss unless someone was watching closely. Those small looks suggested that they were aware the conversation might be drifting toward a more confrontational space than anyone had originally planned in live television. These kinds of moments can unfold quickly. A host may ask a challenging question in the hope of sparking an interesting discussion. But sometimes the wording or implication behind the question creates tension instead of dialogue. When that happens, everyone involved must decide how to respond in real time. Meanwhile, Cranston remained seated calmly, listening to Joy's explanation. His posture remained composed, his hands resting lightly on the table. Years of experience in interviews had taught him how to maintain control of his reactions, even when conversations became uncomfortable. Still, it was clear that the discussion had moved far away from the original topic of his latest project. What had started as a simple promotional interview was now exploring a much more personal idea, whether the characters he played might reflect something about his own personality. For many actors, this is a familiar question, but it can also be a delicate one. Performers often speak about how they research their characters, study their motivations, and try to understand the psychology behind their actions. Yet that process does not necessarily mean the actor personally shares those traits. The ability to portray someone convincingly is, after all, part of the craft of acting, but the way the question had been framed made the moment feel less like a discussion about acting technique and more like a suggestion about personal identity in the audience. Some people shifted in their seats. The earlier sense of relaxed entertainment had been replaced by curiosity mixed with a touch of discomfort. Everyone in the room seemed to be waiting for Cranston's response. Would he laugh it off and redirect the conversation? Would he calmly explain how actors separate themselves from their characters? Or would he push back against what might be interpreted as an unfair implication? Backstage, producers monitored the exchange carefully. Live television has a way of turning simple conversations into unpredictable moments. And once a discussion moves into sensitive territory, it can quickly capture the attention of viewers everywhere on the set. The silence that followed Joy's remarks lasted only a few seconds, but it felt much longer. Those few seconds were enough for everyone watching to realize that the interview had entered a very different phase. The friendly tone that had defined the beginning of the segment had been replaced by a sense of tension that now hung quietly in the air.